Hello everybody, I'm Rotten John and welcome back to some more Conan Exiles fun and excitement. Today we're going to go into the Warmaker's dungeon located over at Klaels Stronghold. Here's a little preview of one of the bosses that we're going to fight, and she is the baddest, the toughest, the strongest bosses out of every one of them in the exiled lands. She will totally decimate any other boss, and she doesn't have a whole lot of health. She comes in at like 5,250 health points, I believe it is, but she wears the arena champion armor, which does roughly 92 to 96% damage reduction. I don't remember which it is exactly, but it's up in the high 90s. So that means with your combined stats and a sword or axe or any weapon, with your combined stats, if you do 100 damage per hit and you hit her once, instead of doing that 100 damage, you're actually only going to do about 8 to 10 damage points to her for each hit. So here we are inside of the Warmaker's dungeon, which is located at Klaels Stronghold. And we're going to skip through or fast forward through a lot of the fighting in the first stage of this dungeon, as I've already covered it in a previous video. We came through this first part, but we did not enter the second part of the dungeon. One thing to keep in mind, once you enter the second part of the dungeon, if you get killed in there, you can respawn back inside the dungeon, but you're in the first part. And without an extra set of statues to open the second door, you're not getting back in. So you could potentially lose all of your armor, anything that you've gained, and possibly the thrall that you brought in here. Now, a little pro tip here, if you do die while you're inside the second part of this dungeon, I would just respawn back at my base and then log off for about 10 minutes. That way, the thrall that you have stuck inside of the second part of the dungeon will automatically return back to the last place that you had them on guard. And another pro tip, when you do come into this dungeon, make sure you bring extra heals, wraps, aloe vera potions, whatever it may be, and bring extra gruel and even some extra aloe potions for your thrall, because they are going to take quite a beating while you make your way through this dungeon. Now, I know this video is going to be on the quite long side, and I don't want you to get bored and start skipping through too much of it, because I don't want you to miss some of the key parts of this. So try as much as you can to watch this all the way through before coming into this dungeon and trying it if it's your first time. Now, for those that haven't seen the other video where I've already gone through this first part of the dungeon, just a quick recap here. After you've defeated the first white boss as you first enter this dungeon, you still need to go around to the 3 different rooms and defeat the, I guess they're the war kings in here. There's a priest king, and I don't remember the names of the other 2 kings in here. But you need to defeat them, as they will drop these statuettes. And these statuettes will get placed into it's an icon that looks like the map room out before the final door to get into the second part of the dungeon. And they also have to be placed in the correct certain positions, which I'll show you here in a second. Like I said earlier, this is going to be a rather long video, and I really hope you don't get bored and start skipping through, especially when we hit the second part of the dungeon. So I don't want you to miss any of the key things that you're really going to need at the end of this. One big goal of coming into this dungeon is learning the recipe for our champion armor. And then we're also going to learn the Godbreaker armor and some decent weapons that we can craft after we learn the recipes in here. But there are some things that you need to be aware of so that we can craft these when we do complete this dungeon. Alright, so we've defeated the 3 kings. Now we need to head back to the center area at this, looks like a map room under glass. Now, this is where we need to place our 3 statuettes. And these are the 3 holder locations that you need to place the statuettes in. If you try to place them in any of the other sockets, it'll just set up traps deeper inside of the dungeon. See, it's the 3 sockets closest to the volcano. Now this is the door we can go into to get to the second part of the dungeon, and right in front of it is another little journal you can read, just like kind of information. And this is where things really get hairy. You'll see on the floor there are tips of spikes that are sticking out. Those will mess you up. They'll stab you, mess you up, ruin your day. And you'll also see round discs on the floor, and those are gas and fire booby traps. Alright, making our way further down into the dungeon here, you'll see the spikes and the gas and fire traps here. This is where you're going to get attacked by your first wave of skeletons. Now the Legion skeletons aren't too awful bad. And here we have a Legion and a white skeleton fighting each other, so that kind of worked in our favor. You can loot them all. I normally only take the most valuable stuff off of their bodies, as your inventory is going to get pretty full coming through here. Now you're going to find these rooms off to the sides in this first section. Some of them will have chests that you can loot, some of them won't. And here's a trap here that you can actually use to your advantage. These square things that you just saw on the floor, if you stand on them, they're going to bounce you up pretty high. And you can use them to get yourself up to higher levels. And you'll want to get up to some of these higher levels to loot the chests, because certain chests will have rusted keys in them, and you're going to need to collect all 4 of the 4 rusted keys to use at the end of this dungeon. And here you see that I just stepped on a gas booby trap, and there I was hit by the spikes a little bit. And our thrall, Delencia, she stepped on a fire trap. But the glowing blue skeleton in the background there, that's the guy we need to kill next, because he will have a key to get into the next part of the dungeon. And he can sometimes drop some really good weapons. Fighting this guy is going to be about the same as fighting the other white boss skeleton at the beginning of this dungeon. He's probably got about the same health, uses the same attacks. Just going to have to take your time and fight through it. One more thing to point out, before you go in to fight each one of these bosses, it's probably a good idea to make sure that you and your thrall are healed up all the way before initiating each fight. It's just going to give you that much more of a chance to come out of here alive. And this key is the key to the arena, and we also got the World Breaker hammer from this boss, which is a really good hammer to use. We'll get more into that later. Now we can backtrack our way back to the main hallway, and head over to the arena entrance. But before we do that, there are a couple areas in here that we want to explore. They'll lead to some more loot chests, and we want to get our other 3 rusted keys before we go on any farther. And I kind of wish Delencia would quit setting off all these firebomb traps here. So right now we're backtracking to where we killed the glowing blue white boss back here. I forgot to come up into this area and show you where to get some more rusted keys. There's this area here where there's just a regular loot chest, but we need to get upstairs here to find our rusted key in this area. Also, keep in mind that at the bottom of all these steps there will be spike traps, and at the tops there will be fire and gas booby traps. And on a couple of these levels there will be other skeletons to fight. Now, each of the chests that contain the rusted key are in different areas. You'll find them in the same spot of each area each time. But in each one of the different areas, the chest is located at a different point. And the one we found there was our 3rd rusted key. We need to find one more. It's not totally necessary to find these keys, but if you want to get more scrap metal to use to make your armors later on, it's well worth your time to find all 4 rusted keys. And just to make you aware of it, to make a full set of champion armor, you need 50 pieces of the scrap metal, and that usually requires 2 and sometimes 3 trips through this dungeon before you can make a full set of champion armor. The same goes true with your Godbreaker armor. And I'm sure you've figured it out by now that it does make it a little easier if you carry a torch in this area just to help light things up. But I've been through here so many times, I know right where the chests are pretty much. And that was our 4th and final rusted key that we need. Now we can head over to the arena. And here she is, the boss killer, the thrall killer, the player killer, the demise of many a players, the arena champion.
Gods take you!
Now pay attention to my health bar. You see that she hit me with 2 light attacks, and look at how much damage she did with just that. And if you look at my thrall's health bar, you'll see that she's down pretty close to being dead. And luckily I had a bunch of bleed stacked on the arena champion. Otherwise she may have killed my thrall. And that was getting pretty close. The arena champion knocked Dalencia down to 1,350 health points. And here we start our collection of armor scraps. And you can harvest her, but you just get the hide, bones, and flesh from her. Now if you want to come through here without fighting her, you can always run around the edge over to this spot. And your first time through, you're really going to want to come to this spot. You're going to have to kill a couple of these serpent men skeletons here also. And activating this blue stone here is going to teach us our champion's armor. And there is another serpent man skeleton to fight in here. You don't have to. Generally though, he's going to follow you for a while if you just try to avoid him. And he does guard a chest that you can loot back here. So let's move on to the next area now. You're pretty safe in this area from anything until you see the first spider. Once you see the first spider, that's when you're going to have to start fighting again. I usually try to lure this first spider back a little ways because there are some rooms in here that have other NPCs and bosses in them. And you don't want all of them ganging up on you at the same time. And once you've cleared out all the NPCs or mobs or bosses, whichever might be in each room, make sure you come into each room because most of them have some chests that you can loot. You can get a fair amount of gold and silver out of them. Each one of these little sub-rooms here have their own set of NPCs that you'll have to fight if you want to get to the loot chests. Now this particular room here has the boss skeleton dragon and 2 Kappa shalebacks in it. It can be pretty tough to fight. Normally I just skip this room. You will get a skeleton key from the dragon, and in the back of the room you'll find the loot chest for it. However, this is a pretty tough fight, and it does take a while, so I normally skip it because it's just not worth it. You can find skeleton keys on other bosses and open up the legendary chests in way easier locations than this. And here I've just skipped ahead to the end of the dragon fight just to show you that you do get a skeleton key from him, and you can harvest them for the dragon bone also. And then I'll show you in the back of the room where his legendary loot chest is. And as you can see, we didn't get anything real special for that big of a long, hard fight. Now this room has 2 of the woolly mammoth mastodons in here. They're a little harder to fight because you're going to have 2 of them after you at the same time instead of just one like you would out in the wild somewhere else. However, these are a little more worth the time and effort to kill because there is a total of 9 loot chests inside of here. You can get some pretty good stuff out of them sometimes. And just to keep from boring you to death, I'm going to skip to the end of the fight with these 2 woolly mammoths. Alright, now that we've made them dead as doornails, we can go to the back of the room, and that's where you'll find 9 loot chests. You'll see here that we got a bunch of gold and silver, as well as a bunch of other odds and end items out of here. Now we can continue on to the last door to fight the last boss in this dungeon. And we'll also find our last 2 recipes in this next room. Now, if this is your first time into this dungeon, I would recommend that you go around and at least get the rest of your armor scraps using your rusted keys in each of these rooms. And also learn your 2 recipes, which are Godbreaker weapons and Godbreaker armor, before you fight the boss. That way, if he does manage to kill you, you've at least got your recipes out of here. Now this will be your exit out of here, and right next to the exit on either side of the opening are your recipe stones. So you just want to approach them and use your action button, and that'll teach you your Godbreaker armor and your Godbreaker weapons. And you'll know it's your exit because you'll see the green glowing screen that you can walk back through to get out of here. If you open the wrong door, which is the entrance, it'll show as a red glowing screen, and it won't allow you to go through it. Now the 4 rusted keys that we collected earlier, those are what you use to gain entrance into each of these 4 rooms. That's where you really want to get into to collect more armor scraps. So here we go now. Now it's time to fight the boss. And once again, I'm going to speed up through a lot of the fight just to save on some time. I'd like to point out that this boss is similar to the boss in the end of the wine cellar dungeon, as every time he loses a quarter of his health, he will grow and then his attacks will change up. And right here you'll see we've got him down to half of his health, and he does his growing and a change up of attacks. Here's another one of his change up attacks right here where he gets this wild swing going on. And if this guy does manage to hit you with his wild swing attack, it's usually 3 hits in a row that he'll get you with. And here's a look at the last of his heavy attacks, and this one can be quite deadly. So we're gonna fast forward to the end of the fight now. Now the main reason to defeat this guy is to get some more of the armor scraps. Like I said earlier, you need 50 armor scraps to make a complete set of the champion armor. And you also cannot harvest this boss's body for any resources. And there you have it. You've successfully completed the Warmaker's Dungeon inside of Klaels Stronghold. Now all we have to do is get out of here in one piece. To get out of this room, you go to where the 2 recipe stones are, activate the door, and walk through the green screen. Now there are a few hidden chests throughout this area, but with our inventory and our thrall's inventory just about packed full, we're not going to worry too much about them. I'll try to point out the ones that are obvious on our way out of here. Now when we make it back to this point, there will be the two skeletons to fight. The stairs to the left there go back into the dungeon if you wanted to run it again. I think you'd have to go deposit all of your stuff before you ran it again. And when you open this door, it brings you back to the map room looking icon where you placed your statuettes. And at this point, we're just going to head for the exit, and we're not going to bother fighting the boss White up here. We're just going to run past him and all the other archers and get out of this dungeon. And there you go, we're out, and congratulations, you've just beat the hardest dungeon in all of the Exiled Lands. And back at our base, I just wanted to give you a quick look at what it takes to make the Arena Champion armor set. Like I said, it takes 50 total pieces of armor scrap to make a full set of the champion armor. And this usually requires running the dungeon at least 2 times. And in the next video, I'll show you the champion's armor and its stats. Alright, so that's it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, please hit that subscribe button. Subscribing is free to you, and it does help me help you in the long run.